Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Apologies, I was distracted. Um, all right, so welcome to the NTP working group at IETF 121. I'd like to remind everybody this is the note well that you agreed to when you registered for the meeting, and it includes all of the rules and processes that we abide by. They've also provided some additional reminders about meeting behaviors, anti-harassment, and the type of environment that we would like to maintain. So please take a moment to read over these. If you have any questions about the note well, please see the IETF leadership. There's also the meeting tips, which recognizing most of you, I'm assuming that you are aware of these, but it's always good to have a reminder. This is our agenda for today. Is there any agenda bashing? Any changes or additions? Nope. All right, with that, we will go ahead and move to the first item, which is our current working group chairs, the update of our documents that are basically moved beyond the working group. We're making fairly decent progress here. The registries document and the enterprise profile from the TikTok working group, which we've included in this set of activities, are both in the RFC editor queue at this point. The NTP interleave modes needs an author update based on some comments received. It has gone through the telechat and is awaiting an author update, and the NTP over PTP is awaiting a Shepherd write-up. Any questions about any of these? Oh, and Eric is reminding us that he's closing TikTok as soon as the enterprise profile is done. Oops, I'll move back one. So stop slides. The next thing on the agenda is we want to have a hackathon update. We had hackathon projects in both NTP v5 and also in rough time. David, do you want to just speak to the NTP v5 status of implementations? And then after that, I'll get Marcus to speak.
Yeah, so part of what we did this weekend, at least I worked a bit on this, and I think Ruben did as well, is looking towards getting an implementation ready to the point where we can start enabling it by default on some of our clients, which is going to be an interesting experience. If anybody thinks this is a really, 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 really bad idea and we really shouldn't be doing it, please let us know. Uh, I think we're at the point now where the upgrade mechanism is in a shape that um, it should automatically detect if anything goes wrong with NTP5 and fall back to NTP4. So um, that is at least a positive thing. Um, I have a bunch of notes for myself that I still need to process, also from this, on how on a few areas of the spec we might need some more improvement on. For the most part, those are going to be minor issues, though. I think, right? Based on how the experience we've had with the implementation so far, I'm actually fairly optimistic. Um, I'm not sure what other implementers of NTP are present here, but I'm really curious, and would like to ask them what the plans are around implementing this in, for example, Crony or NTP sec. So if anybody is willing to give an update on that, I would be open for that.
Not not to put you on the spot, Miroslav, but did you want to speak about the status of your implementation?
Yeah, I have this experimental implementation, but I haven't done any work for Crony. I'm still not sure if this design is what we will end up with. So I would like to avoid
Okay.
complete rewrites and things like that.
All right. And just so that I didn't confuse things, Miroslav does have an experimental implementation. The hackathon website has links to the code for both of those. Go ahead, Marcus, on rough time. Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm just going to do a sort of a quick run through of what we did with rough time during the hackathon. Um, so I spent some time on updating my two implementations, my server implementation, Roughtime D, and the client implementation in PyRoughtime to Draft 11. Me and someone called Sarah Grant did work on an interoperability framework, which Sarah named Plummet. There's a link to the code there, and that framework sort of runs all the servers against all the clients and outputs results, which you'll see in the following slides. Ruben here worked on a Rust server implementation of Roughtime, and then sort of all of us around the table had a bunch of discussions as well, about the draft and some issues we found with it there. So we can go to the next slide. So this is what the sort of interoperability framework spat out, and it looks sort of spotty. But if we go to the next slide, and which shows only the ones that claim to support draft 11, it looks better. The two X's there actually turned out to, I started following a thread trying to find why the two X's sort of showed up there. So why Rough Enough didn't work with Cloudflare's client and PyRoughTime. And that turned out to be a hint of a security issue. So next slide. And the main results here then are we have 3 servers and 3 clients up to date with Draft 11. We found a couple of bugs in some of them. So Cloudflare's implementation was actually missing some tags in its responses. But once I patched that, it worked perfectly. It turns out also that a lot of clients don't check the contents of the nonce and version tags in the responses or verify the signatures in the responses. Rough Enough, one of the server and client implementations, follows RFC 8032 when generating keys. Turns out the other implementation don't. That has some implications, and I'll talk about that during the rough time point on the agenda. We also realized that there are version downgrade attacks on rough time. We'll talk more about that later. And we found a bunch of other issues while discussing. And I think that's the last slide.
Yeah, it is. Any questions on the rough time activity at the hackathon? Go ahead, Eric.
Not so much a question, and it could probably also have been said at the other other slot. But whenever you want a security directorate review, if you think it's documents ready prior to working with last call, prior to IETF last call, we can just click some buttons in the data tracker and request security review. Try to catch some things like this. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on the hackathon activities? All right. I'd like to thank in particular David and Marcus and Ruben for helping out with this. It really helps move the specs along. We seem to get more activity out of the specs after we do some hackathon activities. So, all right. Stop share. Next on the agenda is the requirements draft. We believe this is pretty close to being done. It has been moved over to GitHub. There were some remaining issues to be dealt with. Does anybody have any questions? Or I don't believe. Let's see. Last time I said he wasn't here, and he was. We need to decide in the next few months what we're doing with this draft and how to move it forward. And we will follow up with the authors on that. Next is NTP v5, Miroslav. Oh, wait, you don't have any slides.
Yeah, there are a few changes in the Git repository prepared for the next version of the draft. One is the leap indicator that now has a value for unknown, and the original unsynchronized value is now a flag that is set when the server is synchronized. So the clients will be required to check this flag before accepting the measurement. The other change that was made is reference IDs are now specified for reference clocks like the GPS, and they are included in the Bloom filter to enable clients to detect where the time is coming from. The NTP v5 reference ID is the first 120 bits of the MD5 sum of the string, similarly to the NTP v4 address, for which we don't have the NTP v5 reference ID. Yeah, and I think there are some remaining items. I think we will need to review the use of shoulds, and I think this has the same issue as the interleaved mode draft, that there are too many shoulds and not much context why it is a should. So I think we will need to provide more context or replace it with must or something else. Yeah, there was a comment from someone implementing NTP v5, the draft, and a suggestion that to improve the handling of the draft extension field, the comparison of the strings, when a string can be longer or shorter, and the padding. And so I think this should be easy. And I think there is a lot of editorial work to be done. Some sections I think could be improved.
Okay. So how many people here have read the current draft of NTP v5? Well, that's a problem. You've read it. All right, we need some more eyes on this draft. So if people could please review this, that would be very helpful. It's going to be hard to get it moved through without proper review. Any questions for Miroslav? Benson?
So the draft has a section on kind of different ways of doing the comparison. So I guess you make a number of measurements and then use a statistical method to try and get the best way of the most accurate estimate of the time. Are you expecting to look at other methods, or just the one from the IEEE is a new method?
I'm sorry, which measurement?
So usually you do a number of round-trip measurements between the client and the server, or client and different servers, and then use statistical computation to try and estimate the time most accurately. My question is, are you going to look at other methods that people have tried, or this is the only new one that you're going to include?
Like if it makes sense to use the PTP approach, right? Like the broadcast mode, using the transmission timestamp, assuming a constant delay and calculating the offset from that. Is that what you are referring to?
I guess my question is, are there others that are worth considering? I guess that also seems new for this draft.
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay, I'll take a look, but I guess I haven't done the comparison, so I don't know. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so Benson, I was guessing that you were referring to the algorithmic side of things. One of the goals, as far as I understand it at least, for NTP v5 is that we're going to completely remove any requirements on that front. So the section you are referring to, if I remember correctly, is basically a suggestion of, hey, you can process it this way. You don't have to. And of course, there are other interesting ways to do this. I would suggest strongly that we stick to the position of not including anything beyond the basics. Hey, look here, if uh, for how you can process the measurements and get to an actual clock steering algorithm. We could do an additional draft for that if there's really interest in that, but experience with past specifications on that point, I don't think an RFC is the correct format for that sort of thing, if I'm honest.
Okay, anything else on NTP v5? Thank you very much. Marcus? rough time.
All right, so this sort of before the hackathon, we somewhat naively thought that we were pretty much done. And it turns out maybe we're not. So I'll go into some of the issues that we've sort of realized are in there currently. And the first one is rough time and its handling of. So rough time uses ED 25519 keys for signing responses. And most implementations generate their private keys simply by generating a random 256-bit number and using that. However, if you look in RFC 8032, it tells you that you should use this 32-byte secret, hash it, take the first 32 bytes, clear the highest bit, clear the lowest 3 bits, and then set the second highest bit, and that's your private key. And the reason for that is that if you sort of get unlucky and get these sort of bits set, then that might enable some attacks, which we obviously want to avoid. I found this thanks to the sort of incompatibility between rough enough and other between the rough enough server and clients, and it's sort of unclear what other implementations do, but it seems like most of them don't do it the correct way. While this is, it's mostly an implementation issue, how implementations sort of generate their keys, but considering that what could conceivably happen, we should definitely include some sort of language and guidance on this, including a reference to 8032 and a must when it comes to generating these keys in the right way. Yeah, next slide, please. And the other security issue we found was version downgrade attacks. And in retrospect, this should have been fairly obvious. There's no way for the client to actually check that its request wasn't tampered with. And there's no signing of the version tag in the response either, which means that a man-in-the-middle attacker can do very much actually in between without it being detected by either server or client. And this, yeah, sure. And the suggested fix for this is, instead of just hashing the nonce and putting that in the Merkle tree, we should hash the entire request instead and put all that in the Merkle tree. We should also include the version tag sent by the server in the signed response. And there should probably also be a signed tag specifying what versions the server is supporting in all server responses. Yeah. Yeah, and some other smaller issues. So the fact that we learned that almost all clients are pretty bad at actually checking version tags, checking nonce tags in responses, and verifying signatures. And this really highlights the need for grease. I think it's servers should grease the responses enough to sort of force clients to do this kind of checking. We found what might have been a sort of a regression between two drafts. So we changed a string, and then that sort of appears to have reappeared in a later draft for some reason. I don't think this was deliberate. It might have been. What also was brought up is the fact that the Merkle tree, so the max height of the Merkle tree, is implicitly specified because we have this maximum server response length. But we should really specify that explicitly to make it clear to implementation developers. Currently, we also allow multiple version numbers in requests, and a pretty legitimate question there was raised about, is this really necessary, and what's the use case in that case? So maybe we should look at restricting it to just a single version number in a request. And then there were also several editorial issues being brought out regarding language that could be misunderstood, was hard to understand, and in one case, as Dieter pointed out, we weren't really clear about what we're actually guaranteeing with rough time, which is kind of fundamental to the whole thing. I think is there another slide?
Mhm.
So I was hoping to release, me and Watson were hoping to release a new draft version pretty much today, but I've decided to sort of wait since we have a lot of text to add at this point. There's multiple changes already up on sort of the working draft on GitHub, and pretty much all the issues I've mentioned here also are being tracked on GitHub. And at some point, I'll also write a digest of all this and send to the mailing list. And that's all I had, I think.
Okay, any questions on the rough time progress? A little bit. So you said you were going to put the additional text in. Do you have a rough idea of when, and once that's done, how close you are to working group last call?
For some parts of the text, I have a pretty good idea what's going to go in there. With some other parts, I'll have to think a bit, or
Okay.
we'll have to discuss it.
So,
So we'll see.
all right. So we're looking at a couple more rounds before we're ready for working group last call.
At least one more round, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, the next document that we are working on is NTS for PTP. There's been some progress on that. Martin, did you want to speak to the current status of that effort?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. I have three small points about NTS for PTP. The first one is the implementation. The NTS for PTP implementation is progressing, but slower than originally planned. However, I think that the first test can be done at the end, by the end of this year or the beginning of the next year. And for this reason, I'm planning to participate in the hackathon next year, probably in July, because it's in Europe. In Spain, it's pretty close, and I want to attend in person, so it's the best way, I guess. The next one is the draft document. There are no further updates on the draft yet. A major update is planned for February next year. There are several simplifications in the protocol processes, and there are also a lot of small changes and improvements to be done. So we have a lot of work to do on the text. Furthermore, Ryan and I will also provide our draft document in the Git repository. But I guess we provide it after the next update, because if people read the documents, they should read the current one or the updated one, because there are a lot of changes. The last item is IEEE Security Subcommittee. The point here is that securing PTP messages requires the transport of some data in the authentication TLB, which is currently not covered by the PTP standard. We are currently working on the solution to improve the situation, especially Rainer, Steffen Fries, and I. And we want to enhance the authentication TLV by using some optional and reserved fields. Rainer and I have already prepared a proposal that can be discussed at the next IEEE meeting. I guess we have no schedule yet, but I guess in the next few weeks. And then we have to see how we to proceed further. But this is necessary, especially for the IETF draft document, because this is, some part is PTP standard, some part is IETF draft, and so we need to clarify some points to finalize the draft document, especially about handling the replay or handling replay attacks, use sequence numbers, and how to fill the authentication TLV. So this is a big discussion point currently, but I guess we can solve it, and we already think that we find a solution for that. So yeah, this is the current state about NTS for PTP.
Okay, any questions on NTS for PTP? I'll talk very briefly later about the overall status of 1588. Next on the agenda is the NTS extensions for enabling pools. David, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so about a year ago, I guess by this point, we made a first draft of what a more client transparent version of an NTS pool could look like, and what sort of tricks you would need to support that. That draft is still in roughly the same state as it was a year ago. Not much has changed. Most of the discussion on the mailing list in the meantime has gone to, is this the best approach? What are the approaches that we actually have? We have a reasonable view of what are options. A lot of open questions remain, primarily around, is it doable to run a pool with the pool doing the NTS server and the NTS key exchange? Or is that just too big of a load to realistically be doable? From me and Ruben, there's a project that we are currently looking for funding for, that's in the pipeline, to start implementing an actual pool with a number of parties that have already indicated interest in providing servers for that initially, so that we can start to gain some operational experience. This will be experimental at first, and we'll have to discuss the long-term future of where this is going to live in that process. That'll hopefully give us some ideas of what is actually realistic to do, and at that point we might want to move forward with one or more of these drafts. The draft that is currently listed in the on the working group data tracker is specifically for the pool doing all the NTS work. If anybody is interested in writing up a decent draft for other approaches to doing an NTS pool, feel free to do so.
All right, any questions about this draft? Just go ahead. You are welcome to the mic. It's a small room.
I ask Hansen. I run an NTP pool.
Sorry.
There might be others. I think it would be sort of practically right now the NTP pool get 200,000 to 500,000 DNS queries a second. So some approximation of those would maybe turn into sort of eventually to key exchanges, maybe. So that would be a lot to not decentralize more. So I would be worried about putting more computing logic into the not distributed part of the system.
Yeah, so we're looking at that. You were saying 200,000 to 500,000
DNS queries a second.
Queries a second. That's actually less than I was fearing. One of the challenging parts, of course, with DNS queries is that there's a lot of caching going on in places you probably can't judge.
Right, it's hard to tell.
I think the pool sets TTLs to the current NTP pool set TTLs to a lower value, right?
I think a few minutes, if I don't remember. I can, and we can talk about that another time. I experiment sometimes with changing it, and it scales relatively linearly to whatever boundaries I've tried. Okay. So if I make it shorter, then I go up towards like 1 million queries a second. If I make it longer, then it drops down to at some trailing off point.
Yeah, so part of what we're wanting to investigate is if this is going to be reasonable. A million per second is in the doable category for TLS handling. Um, and there are some reasons why we might find that approach more interesting than others.
I think
I think at this point, our goal is just to get experimental experience with
I
it.
fully support that. I think right now how this for the particular that NTP pool, part of the feature of it is that can run while I'm on an airplane, and there are very few people who do anything with it. Where if the NTP pool was run in a more professional way, then it would have it. I also work for Apple, where we have NTP services, and they run completely differently with professional staff, and there are people watching while everyone else on airplanes. So I think one of the features of running a large scale pool for with very little effort is that a lot of things can go wrong without it impeding the service.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of key exchange service seems monumentally more complicated to sort of keep running than a highly distributed DNS service.
Oh.
So that's my feedback on the current draft.
Yeah, there's going to be challenges here. We are aware.
Marcus?
So I just wanted to mention that when we designed NTS and did the decoupling of the key exchange and the actual time exchange, we did that with sort of the express intent to keep things running even if the key exchange part stops working. And ideally, a client should only do a key exchange once, and then should hopefully never, well, ideally, very rarely at least, have to go back to the key exchange server. So the sort of the availability requirements of the key exchange server should be or could be much lower, and the only people actually sort of affected by unavailability of key exchange would be sort of new users. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Are there any other questions or comments on this one? In addition to the experimentation, I had gone ahead and marked David's draft as a candidate for working group adoption. I know that there's other proposals on how to solve this problem. I think the idea of experimenting with it is a good idea. It's possible we could publish an experimental RFC, or we could get some drafts that have document some of the other ways that do this to help facilitate that experimentation. Any ideas would be appreciated, or any opinions on ways forward with this particular draft. Do you have any thoughts on what you would like to see happen with it?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the way forward here is to await these experimentations that we're planning to do, if we can get them going. One of the main big advantages that this draft has is that it's mostly servers that need to change stuff, which is also why we're interested in pursuing it, by the way. Which means that we can at least initially start experimentation with a relatively small set of changes that it's manageable to have that software in a few places without it being those changes being fully standardized at that point. I think once a more clear picture has formed of how we might want to move forward with actual operational pools, then at that point, I feel would be a good point to start looking at maybe adopting this draft into the working group and moving through that part of the process.
All right, so for the meantime, we'll leave it as a candidate for adoption. Strongly encourage people to review it. And if you have other ideas on how to solve this problem, it would be really helpful to have some other drafts submitted. Anything else on the pools topic? Okay. The next item on the agenda is just a really quick update on what's going on in 1588 PTP activities. There's two activities that I want to call to mind. The first one, Martin has already alluded to, which is the security working group in 1588 is looking at NTS for PTP. They're also looking at some of the authentication TLV issues that were brought forward by some of the members of this working group. And so we expect to have some corrections or some amendments to the authentication TLV behavior itself. And then we expect to have the NTS for PTP to be defined in that new context for the authentication TLV. So that's one set of work that crosses between the two. And the second set of activities that I wanted to be sure that people were paying attention to was there is now a 1588.1, which is CS PTP, client server PTP. And this is a simplification of PTP in a lot of ways to make more like a client server model. There is within the 1588 CSPTP subgroup, there is a draft now that has just begun to be discussed. That group is open to contributions from this group. So if you are interested in following that activity, you can request to be added to the data tracker for, not data tracker, excuse me, to Central Desktop, which is the tool they use for that. And I would strongly encourage you to follow along with that. It's going to also have some implications for our crossover security work. So if you need any additional information on how to get in touch with that particular activity, feel free to contact me. Any questions on 1588 and what they're currently doing? With that, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Any other business? We do hope to have a virtual interim probably in the January timeframe. And probably in December, we will have a joint call like we did back in July between the NTP security interested folks and 1588 security interested folks. So we'll try and get both of those scheduled and get them on the calendar. The next face-to-face meeting for the IETF is in Thailand. I'm not sure that we'll have a conversation about whether the NTP working group will meet then or not. But as Martin has already alluded to, the July meeting next year is back in Europe, and I think that's an excellent opportunity to get some additional hackathon and testing activities done. So I'd like to try and target that. I don't think we're going to try and do any sort of a hackathon activity in Thailand, unless there's a groundswell of people who wish to do that. And with that, are there any other questions or comments? This is a very quiet group. All right, let's adjourn the meeting and have a lovely evening.
So basically, there's multiple routes you can take for pools. The school document specifically focuses on becoming just talking to a normal NTS server, or at least those plans can